Hi there. Welcome to Tiff Reads Books. I'm Tiff. I read books and then I talk to you about them. This week I finished one of the advanced reader copies or ARCs that I had from NetGalley and the publisher, which is Orbit Books, for this week. And I want to talk to you about it. I have some opinions. I will start by saying I was disappointed in this book. So if you liked it and you don't want to hear me complain to you about it, I suggest clicking off. If you are interested in hearing someone else's opinion, I will be doing a good, bad, good sandwich. That is how I want to start doing more of my negative opinions, especially considering this is a debut novel. The author herself is not a debut author. She has published short stories and has done really well with that. This is her first novel though. So Eliza Chan is the author. She is a Scottish-born Chinese author according to her bio, and this is her first debut that weaves in the mythologies of the places that she is from. So the cover art, which first good, this cover art is what pulled me in. It's stunning. It gives you like a feel for what we have. We have this this lovely building surrounded by water, and we have like a kelpie on one side and a water dragon on the other side, and it gives you like a feel for what might happen in the book. The artist is... I accidentally named the designer when I initially recorded this, so the artist is Kelly Chong and the designer is Ella Garrett. I love the colors. I matched my nails to the cover. I love these blues and oranges and teals, and I find them really compelling, and that really drew me in. There's a lot of movement, a lot of water, and this is my month of water books, apparently. So this follows... Okay, brief synopsis to start. We are following three main characters in this city of Tiankawi, which is a half-sunken city. We don't really know what caused the city to be partially submerged in water, but what we do know is that those impoverished live in the depths, and those who are wealthy live up above. And in that divide, we have a kind of like a racial divide. So we have human beings up above the water in the city, and then below the waterline, we have the Fathomfolk, and the Fathomfolk kind of run the gamut of mythological creatures. We have some Selkies, we have some Kelpies, we have some mermaids, some sirens, we have a lot of other... we have water dragons, which are very kind of Chinese dragon, but for the water. Because when I hear water dragon, I think of this, which is a reptile, and that's what I think of. So I had to be like, wait, and reconnect myself with just a Chinese dragon that lives in the water, is kind of the way that they're described. So we have a bunch of other types of creatures that are described. We have also Kappa. There's a Kappa that's a main part of the story, and we have some other creatures that are described, and they all kind of live together in the impoverished areas of the city. So as we follow these three main characters, one of them is a captain of the border guard called the Chinth, and she just got promoted to captain, and this is big for her because she is part siren, and so she is the first of her kind to not only join the military, to be allowed to join the military, but to be promoted to the rank of captain. And so we're following her story, getting some of her backstory, and following her through the rest of it. The other character that we're following from a perspective is Nami. I can't remember if I said the other character's name is Mira. And then Nami, who is a water dragon. She's very young, and we are following her because as punishment, her mother sent her to go live with her brother, who is the ambassador of the Fathomfolk, and just so happens to be Mira's partner. So Nami is a little rebellious. She wants equality for the Fathomfolk, but has also lived a really cushy life in the depths. She's never come to this city before. She has lived in another area where they have freedom to be who they are and express their culture in the way that they wish to. Where when they go to the city, they have restrictions put on them, and they are very much second-class citizens. And so we kind of experience this second-class citizenship through Nami's eyes, where Nami ends up with this bracelet device. And this is me not ever remembering words for things that stories use. It's a bracelet type bracer, goes around their wrist, and when they think of harming humans with their magic, because every single Fathomfolk has the ability to water weave, and that is how they bring in their own personal magics that goes along with the mythologies of the creatures that they are. And we only get a few of what those magics are explained to us, including Nami's. So she has this bracer put on her, which restricts her from doing magic if she is going to do it to harm humans. Other than that, she can do whatever she wants with her magic. She can harm other Fathomfolk, she can do anything, but if it's going to be destructive to the city or to the humans, she cannot do it, and it will cause her immense pain. The last character that we're following is Cordelia, who is a sea witch, and she has her own master plan to control the city, and that's what we're told from the synopsis. Anything else that I tell you about Cordelia and her character arc is a spoiler, so I can't really tell you much about her because we just get a lot of reveals about her, but she is behind the scenes pulling strings for a mission of her own, which if I explain what it is, I spoil the reveal. So it's very difficult to talk about Cordelia, with the exception that she's a sea witch in the realm of the Little Mermaid style sea witch. So that means she has a human-ish upper half, and then she has a squid bottom half. She has those like sideways pupils, but along with being a sea witch, she's a master of disguise. She can turn herself into any shape or form. So we're following these three characters as the plot unfolds, and the plot was a struggle. This is where I start to have some issues. So we're following a plot of essentially mini plots of each character. So we're following Cordelia as she does her thing and pulls her strings, and then we learn about how she's intertwined with the other two characters. Nami's plot is kind of a development of her understanding how to rebel and join. She ends up joining the Drawbacks, which are the kind of villainous revolutionaries. So they're constantly painted in a bad light throughout the book as people who want to cause destruction in order to get the equality that they want. And then maybe they don't just want equality, maybe they want to flip the dynamic and have the Fathomfolk on the top and the humans on the bottom. And we are introduced to two leaders of this group. One is Lynette. She is a very strong, large Kelpie woman who is addicted to essentially amphetamines. They call it two different things throughout the story. It's only mentioned in the first part, and then we just kind of drop off that plot. She is it's called the Midnight Oil or Fugu. It is essentially methamphetamines with the way that we talk about mixing up all sorts of different stimulants in order to be able to constantly be on the go, hence the Midnight Oil. So that's Lynette, and she is a little dramatic in her desires to get the Fathomfolk to join her cause, and tends to lean towards more violent types of protests. And then we have Firth, who is another Kelpie. He is a male Kelpie, and Lynette is a female Kelpie. And Firth is a bit of a quiet leader. He is always at Lynette's side. He seems to be her second-hand man. And he kind of does what she says and encourages other folk. They shorten it from Fathomfolk to folk. So he encourages other folk to join the mission through a more charismatic type of way to approach it, with a more kind of gentle touch. So Nami gets involved with them, and we follow her character arc as she tries to decide how she wants to go about being part of this revolution. Nami believes that the Drawbacks have it right with being more loud and boisterous and dramatic and violent if needs be to get their point across. Mira believes that she can switch people's opinions of the folk by rising in the ranks and being a good citizen. And then we have her partner, who is Nami's older brother and is also a water dragon, who also seems to believe the same way that Mira does. They call it in the synopsis a softly approach. So Mira doesn't want to make any waves. She doesn't want to cause any problems. She doesn't want to rock the boat. She wants to be a good, upstanding citizen and have that be the way that people view the folk. All of this sounds like a really good premise. It's the execution that becomes the problem. And what we end up having, in my perspective, is a very ham-fisted analogy for refugees in larger cities. Refugees who are very specifically of a marginalized and minority voice. In this case, they are all Asian, of Asian descent. And as a commenter on Goodreads pointed out, which since this is not my lens to be viewing it through, I will put a little screenshot of what she said and put the link to her review down and below, which I really think is worth reading. And she pointed out that the way that Chan has done this is to mix up names from lots of different Asian cultures and kind of make them one group of people rather than isolate out what cultures people are from. And that this could potentially be harmful in another way of saying that Asians are all the same. And so her review of that was something that I was thinking about after I got about halfway through the book. I looked at other people's reviews because I felt a little funny about it. And I wanted to see what people who had a more own voices type of review to be able to be viewing this, especially considering we were relying heavily on Asian mythology for a lot of our creatures, with the exception of Kelpies. Because we did have, like I said, some Selkies, but we never saw from their perspective. So we did have like a couple Kelpies that were really involved, and then a siren. We have a kind of setup for a political dynamic, which is something that I normally really like. The problem was, again, in the execution. And the reason that I say this is we had 60 chapters in a 448-page book. And every chapter, we change POVs, which can be really jarring, but it can also be done well. And I unfortunately think this, for me, was very jarring. And the reason for that is that we would get these action-heavy scenes, and we would have a small victory for our POV character. Then that chapter would end with still no resolution in what was happening in the action, and we would change POVs to another character. But that character's POV would usually be a couple of days later, with no indication of how everything worked out. There's one moment that I'll use as an example that I think I can talk about without spoiling. So we have a riot that happens, and Mira is looking for someone close to her. She cannot find them. She panics, she runs through the crowd, and she thinks that she found them, and it turns out to be another character's daughter. And then that chapter ends, and we start back up a couple of days later with that with the daughter being with their mother, and their mother being very upset about what happened. We have no idea about this interpersonal conflict between the two characters who have backstory together and that we are exploring through this story. So the fact that we don't get that interaction is very frustrating when we're trying to show how these characters are all intertwined. There was essentially no point to having that character be kidnapped, that daughter be kidnapped, because we could have advanced the plot without that happening. And then when we jump back to Mira, her mother is resting in bed. So the character she's looking for is her mother. Her mother's resting in bed, and we have no idea what happened until halfway through that chapter, because it's not from Mira's POV, it's from Nami's POV. And we really don't know. We just know that something bad happened, but we don't know what it is. And those are the types of jumps we were making. We were also jumping POVs if Mira and Nami were in the same chapter, we were head hopping. And I was very confused when we would be explaining that another character was having an emotion. And I had to go back and read a couple of times to figure out who was viewing whose emotion, because we kept head hopping within the chapter. And that was very disorienting for me. There was also an interaction with Mira and her partner where she was telling us what her partner was feeling. And it was like, Kai felt this. Kai looked like this. Kai felt this. Like, okay. And it jumped back in that sentence. And I was like, okay, did Kai Did you think that Kai felt that way, or did you know for sure? Are we third person omniscient right now where we know what Kai is feeling, or are we still third person limited where we're viewing everything through Mira's lens? Because I'm very confused on the perspective that we have, and it just kind of made things confusing. So with confusing, I'm going to jump to my next thing, and that was the description of scenery. There were some gorgeous scenes described. One reviewer described it as like a Ghibli movie in their head, and I was like, okay, I can see that. I thought that some of the scenes were lovely in their description, but for the most part, the scenes were confusing. We had some pretty descriptions, but there's a scene where we are in a building and a bunch of drama and chaos is happening. And then we jump from Nami's head at the end of the chapter where stuff is still happening to Mira's head, and suddenly they're outside. But they were just inside, and now they're outside, and a big event is happening outside. And I don't know how we got from inside to outside within the same sentence. Or if we're in an open air building because the building was described as being closed in. There's another element where Nami is supposed to find out how the humans are powering the city, where they are getting their power from and how it works. Her mother sent her to go do that. That was part of her punishment, was you find this out and you send me back the information. So Nami finally finds out how it works, but she walks into a room where the machine is and she instantly knows. No explanation on how until near the end of the chapter, when she gets walked into a room and gets it explained to her. So I don't know how she's telling us, oh, I know what they're doing, when literally she's just walked into the room and there's nothing that says what's happening. So, it's very confusing in how the characters are discovering the plot elements of how the politics works. I think it's because there was so much telling and not a lot of showing. And the same as I said, Kai was feeling this. We weren't told. Kai's face twisted in an expression of anger. You know, not those words. Those are off the cuff, very bad words. I'm not a writer, I'm a reader. We were just told Kai was angry. Okay, how do we know that? And there was a lot of that mixed in with some showing. There were some like I said, there were some quality moments, but a lot of it was very confusing in the writing style. And I believe that's because the author was trying to do too much while doing too little. So we had some world building elements that were like put in, but they weren't, the way that they were put in wasn't cohesive or coherent. They were just kind of dropped in. And this goes along with a lot of analogies and metaphors that Eliza Chan used in her writing style that were not clear to me right away. There were some other word choices. I'm not going to talk too much about the word choices because this is an arc, words can change, but I think there were some word choices where I felt like maybe just a thesaurus was used because I'd never seen that word in that context before. And it meant something similar, but in that context, I couldn't figure out if it actually worked. I was very confused. And this could be that Eliza Chan is a UK writer. I'm not going to harp on that too much because this is an arc, words can change, which is why I'm not going to give you a bunch of quotes. The last big thing for me is the interpersonal relationships, specifically the romantic ones. So we get shown Kai and Mira being very tender to each other, being very supportive. They're supposed to be in like a long-term relationship and they live together and they're very understanding of each other and what the other person's job expectations are and how their life works. And then suddenly we get a scene where Mira's like, I could feel Kai pulling away. But nothing in the scene showed them speaking differently or anything like that. And I was very, very confused. And then that kind of just gets used as a point of tension for Mira to have an outburst later on. And then for Kai to have his big moment of, big show of public display of affection. So I think we could have done without that. There was, again, this is another story where there is so much conflict going on in the background. We don't need a romantic conflict to keep the story interesting. We could just have supportive partners, and that would make it really good. So from this point, we're getting spoilery, okay? So if you don't want to be spoiled, because I think there's a big thing at the end that needs to be discussed, because I was already pretty much done with this book, and then when we hit the end, this dropped it a whole half star for me with the way that it ended. So if you're leaving now, thanks for hanging out with me. Thanks for listening to me rant, and let me know in the comments if you disagree. Let me know what you thought. Let me know if you are planning on reading this. I, again, am very disappointed in this. I really wanted it to be good. Okay, so spoilers from here. All right. A small spoiler is the romantic relationship that Nami ends up with. And this is with Firth, the second in command. We get a lot of implications of him not being a good guy and maybe alluding to Nami's naivety. She falls for him anyway. There were so many scenes with him that I highlighted and I was like, girl, this man's toxic. Like, stop. And I genuinely... She was like, oh, I don't know if I can trust him. And he kept being like, trust me, bitch. And she was like, I don't know if I can trust him. And he was like, I told you, trust me. While he's being violent with her. He's like shaking her. I told you to trust me. And she's like, I guess I could trust him because he's just so pretty. And I was like, oh, come on. Why are we doing this? And then she discovers that she can't trust him and she's afraid of him. And then in the end of the book, she still goes to him even though she's afraid of him. And I don't like how that was handled. And I understand, as someone who has been through that abusive relationship that borders on physically violent, where there is moments of violence, but it's not constant, right? So I've been through that, and I understand that it's hard to leave. It was hard for me to leave. I understand, because you don't want to acknowledge it, because we have an abuse 101 thing happening here where he's aggressive and mean to her and makes her feel bad about herself and shames her and makes her feel like she's done something wrong, when in her head she's like, I know I didn't do anything wrong. Why am I apologizing? And I'm like, girl, because he's doing this thing, which is fine. I can have that conversation, but he does this a few times, and because she has to keep the relationship secret, she doesn't have anyone to talk to about it. Totally fair. But it's the way that once she realizes she has people to rely on, and she realizes he's toxic, and she realizes that her life is better with these people and that he did a really terrible thing, she still goes back to him so that we can have that conflict in the next book. And I was not okay with that. That was something that I was like, this should have been dealt with better, because we are seeing these things, that we're seeing this cycle of abuse where once he gets her in her head, then he starts being all sweet and kind, and he's like, oh, I do these things for you. I did it because I love you. And he does this big confession, and she's like, I melted or whatever, 'cause, sure. So she's like, oh, okay, maybe I was wrong. And I get having those feelings. Those feelings are real. They happen. They're valid. But then once she realizes there's just people to rely on, and that the community that he was in was doing things the way that she didn't agree with, because they did start killing humans, she still goes back to him instead of talking with who she claims to be her best friend, which is Mira. And she refuses to go to anyone for support at all. She just goes right back to him without there being a conversation, because this is in near the very end, the end of the last chapter or the epilogue. And so it's just literally doing it to set up for the next book so that he can still be a character, which I have a problem with. Everything that the drawbacks did that was terrorism was executed in such a way that was so confusing that we had things introduced just for them to destroy. We had the introduction of a giant god that lives under the city, and suddenly had an explanation for why the city was the way that it was in 70% into the book, 75% or something like that. We had this description of what happened, and then we get the introduction that the gods are pairs. So even though the drawbacks killed this one, there's supposed to be another one, but we never see anything from it. So in that moment, we have to protect the city. So we have we have Kai giving his life, because there's this whole thing about how dragons can give up their life for a pearl, which will grant super magic. And so he gives up his life because Nami wasn't strong enough. And Nami she like gets a wish to like be able to protect the city from the big tsunami that was coming. And instead of wishing for it not to come or something, she decides the best way to join everyone up is to wish that all of the humans had gills so that none of them would drown. So now, in the epilogue, we have this whole conversation of what does it even mean to be Fathomfolk anymore when everybody has gills? As if, one, giving people gills, let's talk about giving people gills does not save them from a tsunami. It saves them from drowning. They can still be crushed. They can they can still be crushed. Buildings can still fall. Buildings are destroyed. Lives are destroyed. Everything has to be rebuilt. Giving them gills just protects them from drowning. Nothing else. They can still be injured mortally. So the second thing is we've decided the way to unite people is to try to make them all the same. Which is the setup for every dystopian book ever. So not every, there's some that are very much set in the class system, but so many utopias, like dystopians, disguised as utopians, are making everyone the same. Literally, I understand why the reviewer who I have been mentioning said that the ending was incredibly offensive. I did just realize that this is actually a different reviewer said this, and so I have screenshot their review and put it here, and I will link to theirs as well. Because it does feel like incredibly offensive, especially since we are now discussing what it even means to be of your own culture or race. If somebody else has a feature that is from your culture or your race, are you still your race or your culture? And that feels gross. I don't like that. I'm going to leave it at that. One last minor thing. Well, it's not minor. It's a smaller plot point, but it's my first ick was we have this moment where our sea witch takes Mira's voice and puts it into a rock that she keeps in a bag so that she can use her siren song to manipulate people. And Kai gives up his voice in exchange for Mira's. So Kai is left voiceless. And he can sign immediately. He can do sign language. He is, upper class. I'm not concerned about the fact that he knows sign language. He is an ambassador for all the Fathomfolk. I would expect him to know multiple languages. But him only being able to sign because he's mute makes him incapacitated in terms of his job. Which does not make any sense to me. He is still physically healthy. He is still has his wits about him. All it is that he cannot use his voice, which he can sign, and it has been shown that there are interpreters in this city for sign language. So why would we not just say that he needs an interpreter? Why would we make him incapable of doing his job? He is legally incapacitated from his job. And that is glossed over and never discussed because, oh my God, it means Mira gets to stand in his place and she gets to be the interim ambassador. So yay! Yay for Mira, because now not only is she going to be interim ambassador, for her to do that, Kai has to marry her. So she gets a marriage sprung on her from this relationship that she a week ago was like, I think we're distancing from each other. I don't think this is working. But now they're going to get married and everything's great. So they're going to get married and she's going to be the interim ambassador because Kai, since he has to use sign language, is incapacitated. And I was like, why are we glossing over this? Like this whole thing. And I struggled with that part. Okay. So that was like 15 minutes of my struggles with the book. I don't know, honestly. I think this is a 1.5. I was really upset with it. I really was excited. I love mythological things. I love water stories. I love fantasies that aren't set in medieval Europe. I really wanted a story of political intrigue and, you know, class and race disparity to be kind of like a Star Wars-y thing, right? Like, you know, I'll follow a rebel group if with some political intrigue and some behind the scenes string pulling and some magic. That sounds awesome. This wasn't, I think this needed a couple more rounds of edits and it would have been something good. And it potentially needed some more diverse beta readers, because I don't know where some of this got missed, and I'm kind of disappointed. So that's been 2 arcs in a row that have let me down, and I'm still super grateful that I got to read this ahead of time. It's coming out February 27th. If you read it and you think differently from me, I'm happy to have a conversation. Maybe I'm wrong on some of this. Maybe I'm too harsh of a critic, but I was wanting a more cohesive story. I could have let some other things slide. The romance parts, the romantic issues, I probably could have let slide if we'd had some better coherent world building and storytelling. The switching POVs every chapter did not work in this case. It was very disorienting, and I was struggling to figure out where we were in the timeline, and I did not have fun with that. So I wanted a fun book, and I did not have a fun book. So thanks for sticking around with me. I'm sorry that I talked so long. I'm a wordy bitch, I'll admit it. Yeah, hit me up in the comments if you have opinions, and I will see you soon. Actually, we'll see you on Monday with a big announcement that I'm very excited about.